I think that there is a space for every single person out there to help with these sorts of movements, right? And it's always very hard. When I first started learning about conservation as an engineer, I felt like I couldn't really do anything because I was an engineer, right? I wasn't a wildlife biologist or an ecologist or anything like that. And so it felt like I was very out of place. But through that process, as I was exploring that a little bit more, I found ways in that, my skill set, my specific skill set of engineering could be applied to help in these bigger issues.
Welcome back to The Bomb. I'm your host, Majenta Strongheart. This week, we're joined by 2019 Hackaday Grand Prize winner and 2020 Hackaday Prize Judge, Shah Selbe. Shah is the founder of Conservify and Managing Director at FieldKit and a former resident here at DesignLab. With his background in engineering and conservation, Shah works with countries and communities all around the world to come up with open source solutions to environmental challenges. It's amazing to see how far he's come. Recently, Shah's been living his dream. Through his nonprofit Conservify, him and his team go on expeditions with scientists and conservationists all around the globe. They've been monitoring water in the Amazon forest, watching the behaviorisms of lowland gorillas in the Congo, and so much more. Throughout this episode, Shah breaks down how open source technology is a key component for environmental and wildlife conservation, and how Conservify and FieldKit are making an impact in these spaces. With that being said, I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Shah. Welcome back to the lab.
Yeah.
How do you feel being back here?
It's great to be
Did you
back.
miss it?
Yeah, I did miss it. Yeah. I have so many good memories being here, through the residency and just all the events and stuff that happens here. Yeah, it's a nice place. It feels like a home in Pasadena for me.
Yeah, home away from home.
Yeah.
That's great. That is what I feel like we should always be aspiring to be for all of our past residents and collaborators. And I do feel like we have that essence.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I appreciate you validating that.
Yeah, of course.
You've been part of the family for a long time, the DesignLab, Supplyframe, Hackaday family. And it's great that we have some past interviews and recordings of the talks you've given about Conservify and about FieldKit to sort of pull from. But maybe we could quickly go over kind of the relationship you've had with us through these projects and through your organization. For those in our audience who are unfamiliar, Shah and his co-founder, Jacob, were past residents at DesignLab, and we help support you all in developing FieldKit. And then you spoke at a number of conferences, SuperCon, and some of our past events, Hackaday LA that we used to hold at DesignLab. And then it was amazing to see FieldKit get entered into the Hackaday Prize in 2019 and win the grand prize of $125,000.
Yeah, it was huge.
Woo! Round of applause. The crowd goes wild.
Yeah, and with so much of our team being kind of the Hackaday community, that's like the greatest validation we could have gotten. It was amazing.
Yeah, and I know that you all, you actually recruited one of your engineers at Super Conference one year, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the people on our team have been to previous SuperCons and are avid Hackaday readers and all that.
Yeah, and you all are such an excellent example of what can be done, what can be accomplished with open source hardware and with open source products. I think that's something that we're really trying to highlight and expose throughout the Bomb podcast is what's possible, even from a business perspective. It is, viable to have an open source product and make money, and things don't have to be closed in order to be successful, and some of these types of things. So I'm excited to dive into that more.
Yeah, for sure.
So what would you say, why is open source integral to the work that you and Conservify and FieldKit do?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a big believer in open source. I'm on the board of the Open Source Hardware Association. And part of when I started Conservify and then subsequently FieldKit, like very core to the mission of both those organizations was how do we develop new technologies that can be used in wildlife conservation and environmental protection and things like that, or field science. And then how do we make sure that those technologies we develop have kind of a life beyond that specific project that we're working on, or our team and how many pieces of hardware that we put our hands on, and we really see kind of open source as that multiplier of the effort, right? For the industry that I work in, which is conservation, we're seeing drastic changes to the planet that are happening faster than our ability to react. And I deeply believe like the only way that solutions are going to be kind of viable in that space is if, more than one person can kind of take that solution and adapt it to their own needs.
We actually just had one of our previous guests recently, Jason, was talking about that, how open source literally is what he also believes is going to make it possible to accomplish this work at the scale and sort of speed necessary.
Yeah.
That being able to have sort of exponential development rather than linear development that's, in this closed environment where you have to go through these processes cycle by cycle and keep iterating instead of just getting it out there and getting other people to iterate off of those developments is huge.
Yeah, of course. And, when both Conservify and FieldKit, which are now their own separate organizations, are nonprofits, right? So we're not a kind of the formal structure of a business trying to sell either a product or consulting services around engineering of something for a client. We do that sort of work, but we're also trying to kind of educate and push the field forward through like communication of, these are these better hardware tools, these are these better, software solutions, and kind of here's all the code on how to do that, right?
Right. Could you break down for us exactly what FieldKit and Conservify are composed of as far as these different elements you've mentioned so far?
Yeah. So, Conservify was started in 2015. And the focus around that was, there was a lot of excitement around using new technologies in field science or conservation work, but there wasn't really a good, a space or there wasn't an organization that was pushing that forward from like the technology and the engineering standpoint. And so I started Conservify as like a tech development lab, where we would basically work with clients. They would come in, they'd have an idea, I want to measure X, Y, and Z about a tree in the middle of the rainforest. And, I can't use the tools that are currently available because either, they're too expensive or they're not measuring the right thing or they don't interface with the types of systems and other stuff we want them to interface with. And so we would work with that client to kind of design a new solution around that. And then, once that solution is designed and built, then we go on expedition with them to those places and test them out and see, if we have to go back and change some things, which we pretty much always have to do because these are really hard environments that we're working in. And then eventually it gets to the point where, we'll build a handful of them or something like that, and they'll use it and go off and do it. And then if anyone else wants to replicate it, they can do the same. In that work, we were doing a ton of stuff around sensors, because everybody's really interested in measuring environmental change. The sensors that are currently available are proprietary, or, a lot of the companies that are working in that space are using very old electronics designs. They're not leveraging a lot of the stuff that we've seen with IoT and electronics nowadays. And then if you want to measure a couple different things together, it becomes very complicated, right? Like if you have a project that's looking at weather and water quality at the same time, that's not something that you can easily, you put out a water quality sensor, you put out a weather station, and then you have to download all the data and put it in Excel and then do all this sort of stuff. And we wanted to kind of solve all those problems and create a platform that allowed other people to kind of build on that and create their own environmental sensors that they want to do the same. And that's what fueled FieldKit. It became its own organization because of the demand that we saw around building environmental sensors for people who are working out in the wilderness. And so that's kind of how that other organization is now focused. And FieldKit, while it's still a nonprofit, we're trying to structure it more like a kind of a traditional electronics company, consumer electronics sort of company. One thing that we're doing with that is we're kind of working through what that model looks like. Is you're a nonprofit, you're selling a product, and you want that product available all over the world. There's all sorts of things you have to think about in terms of tax implications and customs, and
right.
It's a big thing. And then all that stuff that we're working on for the business plan is also going to be open sourced as part of FieldKit. So if people want to kind of copy what we did there, they can do that themselves. So.
And do you have any other, are there any other organizations you're looking to to learn about how they did that? Are there any other benchmarks in the space as far as that goes, or are you sort of one of the first doing that?
I mean, I think there are some. There's people within, I think like the international development space that have done sort of similar work and public health sort of technology work. But there's a lot of things that we're figuring out for the first time ourselves. And we work with foundations and other organizations that give a lot of money to other nonprofits. And some of the questions that I asked them are questions that they've never been asked before, right? And so some of it we're figuring out from scratch, and that's really hard to do. Yeah.
But that'll be such an incredible resource then, like you said, once you've figured that out, to be able to pass that on to other organizations who are trying to accomplish the same thing will be an awesome tool for them to add. I mean, and for you to add to your toolkit.
Totally. And I hope that they do, because I think there is value in nonprofits being able to manufacture and sell products like that.
Right. And not be fully dependent on some of these other streams of funding. Like, I know that's such a challenge in the nonprofit space, is just sustainable funding to be able to do the work and make the impact that you're trying to make on a regular basis consistently.
Completely. Yeah, totally.
Here's a clip from my previous interview with Shah, where he brought me up to speed on FieldKit's evolution since winning the Hackaday Grand Prize. You can find a link to the full update in the show notes at the end of this episode.
Winning the prize was like such a huge validation to us. It helped us get rid of some of the imposter syndrome that, we all have. Right now we're deploying FieldKits with indigenous communities in the Amazon, with, Cameroonian researchers in the Congo Basin, educators across the country. We've actually continued to evolve the product line, and we've started the development of an underwater version of FieldKit.
You were talking about developing a FieldKit for underwater, right? How's that going?
It's going great. I mean, it obviously has been slowed by the supply chain crisis that we've been in. But that project really stemmed from work that we're doing with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute that's based in Panama. And so STRI does a lot of work around monitoring of coral reefs. And there's a researcher there that we've been working with named Davey Klein, who's focused around a lot on how coral reefs will change over time because of climate change. And, the sensors that he traditionally put in the water there are like, $30,000, $40,000, $60,000 sensors.
Wow.
And so we thought that we could take a lot of the work that we'd done with FieldKit and the water quality stuff we've done with FieldKit and develop an underwater version, using pretty much the same circuits. We add things that are more appropriate to, marine environments and stuff like that. But we're targeting, under 2K, even around 1K if we can get it to that level. And that's, I think that's going to be a huge thing, right? So absolutely. Yeah, we're hoping to get it in the water, within weeks, the first 5 prototypes of it. That's so exciting. You'll have to keep us posted on that. Yeah. So maybe you could tell us about 2 or 3 projects that you all are working on. Yeah, of course. Yeah. One project we've been doing for the last couple of years, and I think later this year we have a big expedition around it, is we've been working with UCLA and an organization called the Congo Basin Institute to kind of instrument and deploy radio network in a rainforest in southern Cameroon. So it's in this location that's called the Jah Faunal Reserve. And there's been a research camp there for decades. And researchers from Cameroon, from Europe, US, all over the place come so that they can study things like hornbills and primates and stuff in this rainforest. And they stay at this camp. And the cool thing about that rainforest is that there's these big hills that jet out of the rainforest. And we're using those hills as like radio towers. And we're putting solar powered LoRa stations on the tops of those hills. And then, we're deploying a bunch of FieldKit sensors. We're deploying LoRa GPS tags on hornbills, on birds, and some other stuff. And we're basically creating this open network so that anybody who wants to come and do research in that area can bring back their data using open LoRa technologies. and be able to kind of share that in real time. I think after this next expedition in October, the network will be fully implemented. A bunch of FieldKit sensors will be out there, and we'll be testing the first of the GPS tags. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, super exciting. It's interesting to hear how you all have to use the environment, things that you might typically think are going to be hindrances, to what you're setting up. You've been able to kind of work in and problem solve around. And I know that you all have told me all kinds of different stories about some of those things, the challenges of mounting some of the stations and things that you've had to install around the world. Do you have any other examples of when you've sort of been able to turn a challenge into an advantage?
Yeah, I think, it's a lot of our projects tend to be really remote and very hard to get to. And so the challenges are, they sometimes you can't quite anticipate them, right? So a lot of times things will kind of eat through, like insects and other stuff will eat through the cabling and things that you've deployed. One of our projects that we have in the Amazon, we're continuously kind of iterating around challenges there because the difference between the wet and the dry season in the Amazon is huge. I mean, some of these places, the change in water level can be as much as 20 meters between.
Oh my gosh.
So how do you deploy something when like
has to be ready for literally anything? Yeah.
And it's not like, just put a buoy out there, because when it's the wet season, then you have these giant rainforest trees that are washed into the water and they're just taking out everything on their way down. Right. So it's a really hard, the fun thing about the work that we do at Conservify and FieldKit is that every project has its own weird challenges that you can't really anticipate until you get out into the field and you see how things really are. That's the one thing that we always try and do is every new project we take on, we always have to have a trip, like an assessment trip, right?
Kind of research.
Exactly. Where we go out there and we see what the environment looks like and we understand what the real challenges are, things that you just can't get over a Zoom call or, an email, right? And you get out there and you'll have like 1,000 ideas on how what you were originally thinking was just completely wrong, right? Because like everything is completely different than what you were expecting. And even then, after designing a solution and going back for the actual implementation or the deployment of that technology, you're still always surprised,
Right. Are
wild.
there any go-to kind of tricks you've come up with to make things more modular or adaptable to this variety of environments, whether it's extra loops for zip ties or something that you can use, straps to connect to, or ways to clip things together, or different kinds of, is there any sort of invincible enclosure material you've found is the best? Or
well, a lot of those things that we've kind of thought through, were put into the design process around FieldKit. And so we built it in a way that the interactions that you actually have to have once you're out in the field are pretty minimal. And they're not going to really, you don't have to worry about kind of opening up boxes and getting, swampy fingers all over stuff and things like that. So I think we've done a really good job of like building in a lot of that. Just based off of the experience that, me or Jacob or Jer, who's, another one of the founders for FieldKit, have kind of gone into as we've looked into that whole thing. But yeah, as I said, we're still always surprised.
Yeah. Still always learning and problem solving.
Yeah.
So I'm going to rewind a little bit into your background. You come from aerospace engineering, correct? And you were a National Geographic Fellow, or still are. I don't fully understand how that works. Do you ever graduate from the program?
Yeah. So,
or you're in it for life?
Well, yeah. I'll explain kind of how that goes. So my background is, I was a spacecraft propulsion engineer for about a decade, working at Boeing on satellite. All like geosynchronous satellites and things like that. And then, I ended up going back to school for a master's at Stanford. And that's where I got involved in this whole idea of conservation technology. That's where I learned that, the conservation challenges that we're facing, we just didn't have the right tools for it. Right. And I started working on a grad research project around that. And that's what fueled this whole thing. In 2013, I was named a National Geographic Explorer. And so that during that time, that was a program where they picked around like between 15 and 20 people every year that they thought were doing interesting work. And they brought them in the family as like Nat Geo Explorers. They gave them a little bit of money. And then you had the opportunity to work with National Geographic on projects since then. Actually, Nat Geo gave me the seed funding to start Conservify. And so I've always had a very close relationship with them. The next level up from Explorer is a fellow. And so in 2016, I became a fellow, and I was a fellow there for 3 years, working around conservation technology, some of the projects that we had in Southern Africa, and thinking through like how Nat Geo can help to support this moving forward. And so there were some things I did there, like there was a thing called the Marine Protection Prize that I put on with National Geographic, and there they gave away $450,000 to projects around technology to protect marine protected areas, which are like basically parks in the ocean, right? And there was a bunch of other projects that came from that.
Awesome. And so you said though you're sort of, is it one of the things where once you're in, you're kind of forever part of the family? I'm sure you're always meeting people and helping advise and kind of mentor other fellows and that sort of thing. Yeah,
much of the way that this feels like a home for me in Pasadena, Nat Geo headquarters in DC feels like a home for me out there. So,
that's great.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Very cool.
Really cool.
I'm excited that we're hopefully going to have your engineer Bradley on the bomb down the line, and to follow up a blog post that he wrote about some supply chain challenges that you all were facing and how he sort of worked on designing the hardware to be resilient to some of those things, or had to, redesign some of the things to combat those shortages.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear from your perspective, what are the other ways, as a business, as an organization, even if it's other parts of the industrial design or the packaging, that you guys have instilled, sustainability and resiliency into the work you do?
Yeah, I mean, we're always trying to think about that. It's hard working in electronics, right? Because a lot of the materials that go into these components are not necessarily sustainable, and so it's a balance, right? Like, how do we make sure that we're creating something that is useful in the data that it collects, and that in the kind of conservation action that it promotes, knowing that a lot of the inputs and stuff we have to use are not necessarily ideal, right? So we design FieldKit to the hardware itself to actually be able to be mounted in very easily available kind of electronics boxes that you can find anywhere in the world. And when we think about the design of how do you actually deploy one of these things, when we put in bolt patterns and other sorts of things into the mechanical design, we always make sure that we're designing it around what can be easily found in a hardware store and anywhere in the world, right? So one thing we don't want is, I don't want FieldKit to have to, you need to buy this special bracket from us to be able to put this out somewhere. I want it to be like, if this thing breaks, you go to a hardware store and you can find exactly what you need. And that hardware store could be in Nigeria, or it could be in, Los Angeles, and it's still the same thing that you can find
that's
all
huge.
over the place. So we think a lot about that. We also think a lot about what happens to these things at the end of life, right? And so when we're going through the design process, we make sure we're not designing things in a way that, if it fails, it's not failing catastrophically that might impact the environment around it. And we're constantly trying to build in we have a recycling program at FieldKit, whereas if you no longer need your FieldKit, you can send it into us, and there's incentives that we are building around that, and that is a constant process to figure out what makes the most sense there.
Right.
But I want it so that these things aren't necessarily ending up in landfills. They can come back to us. We can process things the way that we process them, or find other homes, or do whatever we end up doing with them. And we've already done that with a lot of the FieldKits, the earlier versions that have gone out on projects elsewhere. So with the supply chain stuff, that's been huge, right? I think anybody working in hardware, that's been the defining thing over the last couple of years. It's in probably the worst possible time to be building hardware in modern history. So that's been quite difficult. And luckily, because we are a nonprofit and there are organizations that believe in our mission, we've been able to kind of keep the team going through this inability to build and sell products. And I think that hopefully next year and moving forward, we'll be able to kind of prove out that business model a little bit in terms of a revenue source as opposed to philanthropic funding to be able to do a lot of that sort of work.
Right. And I think that's one of the advantages of building such a strong community around your organization is that you can be honest about these kinds of things and people understand. We've talked to some other founders about that sort of thing. Like when people have been part of the journey of developing the product or the organization growing, I think they're a lot more empathetic to like
for sure.
these things that are out of your control, you know, which is which I think is a benefit of the kind of work you do. Yeah.
We've had like these frozen 2 years of not being able to kind of help and everyone's really eager now to get out and do the good work now.
Right. So, of course, we're all aware of the Supreme Court's recent decision on West Virginia versus EPA.
For context, the Supreme Court's recent decision on West Virginia versus EPA limits the EPA's ability to regulate carbon emissions in the power sector. In essence, they ruled that the Clean Power Plan established under the Obama administration went beyond the EPA's regulatory mandate.
Could you sort of break down what's happening here and how it's affecting the work of conservationists?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely hurts that. Essentially, what it did was it lessened the ability for the EPA to do stuff around the Clean Air Act in dealing with more polluting industries like the coal industry. So, you know, there's certain kind of enforcement or regulations that can be imposed as a result of the Clean Air Act that will cause them to, you know, basically move away from things like coal into clean energy. And this decision diminished that ability for them to do so. Fortunately, it wasn't as extreme as it could have been, but it also, you know, is not a good sign for the ability of the Clean Air Act to be a kind of the legislation it was supposed to be in the first place, right? And this is always really difficult, right? I mean, a lot of times when we're working with organizations that want to gather this data out in the world with FieldKit or whatever tool, you know, they that data traditionally has a couple different places it goes, right? So if you're a scientist, that data goes, a lot of times scientists want to write papers, so academic journal entries and stuff like that, journal articles on the data that they collect, and it goes into this kind of academic system and other people can evaluate it. Sometimes that data will then be picked up by newspapers and they start saying, okay, scientists found that X, Y, and Z happened, and that can like drive action. A lot of times other people will put out sensors and things like that. They'll try and collect data and then they'll use it to kind of demonstrate how bad things have gotten. So this is more of like a name and shame sort of approach, like, oh, you know, the mining industry here has made water quality go down, and they do a big kind of campaign around that sort of work. And then there's other ways. So, you know, in the US, we're fortunate to have some regulations like the Clean Air Act that are around, but in a lot of countries they don't. So, you know, when you're collecting data in places like that, you have to make sure that that data is scientifically relevant, that, you know, the things are calibrated, and that if you're going to take that data and try and actually, you know, use it in the court system or like try and cause change in the thing, that people can't poke holes in that data. It becomes that the kind of the chain of custody of that data becomes very important. And so it's really interesting to see how it is in different parts of the world, how people deal with this sort of thing. I mean, we're lucky in the US where we can identify these sorts of changes and we can, you know, get on social media or get on the news and talk about them, and people can actually try and drive action. There's lots of places, including where I, you know, very close to where I was just a couple of weeks ago in the Amazon, where if you do that same sort of thing, you can end up killed, right? There was a journalist and an indigenous rights activist that were murdered in the part of Brazil that's, you know, just tens of kilometers away from where I was in Peru the other week, and a lot of times like that sort of collection of that data could be very kind of detrimental. I mean, it could mean your life, right? Yeah.
How do you remain optimistic, or what do you see as sort of the silver linings in some of these situations?
Yeah, I'm an optimist. You can have to be an optimist and work in this field
to keep doing it.
Yeah, because otherwise, like, you would just get depressed and you'd leave and find another job. But you know, I see things that I think are us moving in the right direction, right? I mean, I think young people nowadays are amazing, like all these young activists that we see that are talking about climate issues. The other thing that I find I'm really kind of inspired by is the way things have changed about how we talk about Indigenous rights and Indigenous people and their kind of connection to climate and kind of the power that they have and the power that we should be making sure that they keep having around protecting these sorts of places. And that's a conversation that's like fairly new. And even you see it in the scientific world. It's great too, because, in the scientific world, there's this concept called parachute science. And so traditionally, like when you do science in places like the Amazon, you would have like, a professor from Yale or Harvard that like goes into the Amazon, collects all this data, and then ends up going back to their university with that data. And that's called parachute science, because these scientists are basically parachuting in, they're doing all this work, and then they're leaving with like not really paying attention to the community or like any local scientists or really, building up that sort of stuff. And I see a big movement to try and change parachute science. And I think low cost tools like FieldKit are helping move that forward, right? And so I think once you add up all these different things and just this greater public knowledge about what's happening with climate change and the environment in general, I think we do have the ability to change things. We're still fighting against the same thing, like industries and politicians and all these sorts of like,
right.
People that are trying to slow down the process, but it's getting harder for them than it was before.
Right.
And I hope it just keeps on getting harder. Mm-hmm.
How do you go about building those relationships, effectively and with respect and sort of in the way you're talking about, in that ideal way?
Yeah, I mean, it's a process, right? And so, when we start a project with another organization, we won't start a project with an organization that doesn't already have those relationships in the community. So usually it's like, there's some commitment, they've been working in the community for a decade before or something like that. And there's a kind of a desire and a plan for them to continue working for another decade after or something like that. So all the projects that we're doing in places like Mexico or the Amazon or Cameroon or whatever are with organizations that have these long-lasting relationships. I just found that it's not like we don't take a project like, oh, we would love to work on glaciers and we're just going to fly in and throw some hardware down on the ground and then fly out. That's not how we do things, right? Mm-hmm. Where every single new project we take on is with a partner, and that partner knows the science. They have connections to that community. They're the ones that can actually get the conservation work done when they get the data that the stuff that we build allows them to get. And then we come in as the tool maker to help them do that.
Right. Just to help smooth the process and make it more accessible.
Yeah.
I think that's really helpful for people to understand how to effectively manage those relationships and that it's integral to the longevity of the work.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like if somebody really wants to work somewhere, like I really want to work in South Africa or something, right? Then don't just jump on a plane and go to South Africa and start trying to do stuff. Like understand who's out there doing that sort of work. What are they already doing? Yeah, what are organizations that are respected and that you can start working with, right? And that would be the way that I would say, because that's the way that whatever work you put into it, that there's going to be a sustainable outcome to it.
You talked a little bit about people being able to get more involved, the young activists that you're inspired by, and also a little bit about, people jumping on the news and on social media to try to support different causes in the space. How do you feel like, if the average person is overwhelmed by the climate crisis and what they can do to be involved? I think probably number one, I'm going to guess, your answer, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but is to get educated. Yeah. Is probably the first step. But after that, how can people, through different methods, I know people can volunteer in some spaces. What would you say is the most effective way to help if you feel passionate about, trying to make a difference?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is something I've talked about before because I feel very strongly about this, but I think that there is a space for every single person out there to help with these sorts of movements, right? And it's always very hard. When I first started learning about conservation as an engineer, I felt like I couldn't really do anything. because I was an engineer, right? I wasn't a wildlife biologist or an ecologist or anything like that. And so it felt like I was very out of place. But through that process, as I was exploring that a little bit more, I found ways in that, my skill set, my specific skill set of engineering could be applied to help in these bigger issues. And I think that regardless of what your own individual skill set is, that you can find ways to help. So you can be a graphic designer or a writer or whatever. And there's organizations and people out there that are just dying for those sorts of skills. And I'm a big believer in volunteering because I've done a lot of it in my life. And that's how I started all of this work, was volunteering at first. And so I think, if you're okay with volunteering, find an organization that's doing good work that you really appreciate, and volunteer your time to try and help them. Like, if you're an artist, draw things for them, right? I mean, whatever it is, use your skill to try and help that movement move forward. And that's a very easy way for you to kind of contribute to that without feeling out of place, right? And I guarantee there's going to be people in that area that are looking for that sort of skill set that you have. I think that's an easy way to do it, but definitely learn about the issue before you jump into it. There's a lot of issues in the environmental space that people get really excited about that turn out that they're like not really the real issue out there. They're just like what
Something
a lot of
trendy.
Yeah, very trendy, or it's a big social media push around this sort of thing, when there's much bigger problems out there that we need to address. That just maybe don't sound as flashy. And so like education about that first and foremost is really important. Yeah. And I mean, we live in a time where like it's so easy to read about these sorts of issues and learn about them, right?
Right. And find an organization near you that you can support.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a great tip. So what are the things you're most excited about for the future of FieldKit and Conservify?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited with where we are in terms of FieldKit. Once we can kind of get over the inventory issues that we have, we've put so much work into the data visualization portal and the app and all the hardware. One of the cool things I really like is that people can kind of come in and build their own modules for FieldKit and make it their own. And so we do have people that are exploring, okay, I'm going to take this this part of FieldKit and I'm going to turn it in something that's going to work for aquaculture, or I'm going to use it in like the agricultural space or something like that. And I get really excited about hearing those new ideas about projects from people. I think that's something that FieldKit allows because it is very kind of modifiable and modular. Yeah, allows people to kind of mix and match what they want. And so I can't wait until we just have enough of them to be able to either, to put them on the shop and to give them away. We have, we're working on a couple giveaway programs, over the next, year or so that are going to go to, projects in need, right? And indigenous folks and stuff like that. And so I'm really excited to see where those go and what sort of stuff people, end up, pulling back from that.
All right. So what is sparking your creativity at the moment, kind of outside of your day-to-day work? I know you are an amazing photographer. I'm just going to throw that in there. If people don't follow Shah on Instagram, you should check it out because you have awesome photos that you're always uploading. But what sparks your creativity outside of everything you have to do for work?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely photography. And so trying to use photographs to tell stories about some of the stuff that we're working on is something that I'm always trying to get better about. I think there's a lot of opportunity in just telling some of those untold stories through those sorts of things.
Have any of your photos been published in National Geographic?
Yeah, so I was National Geographic had a stock agency called Nat Geo Image Collection. It actually just got taken apart when Disney bought it, but I was one of the Nat Geo
contributors.
Image Collection, photographers, and so some of my photography has made it into articles before. Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, I feel like we need to have you on for another like special episode where you're talking about how to just almost as like career advice, how to meld all your worlds into like. Because I feel like you've accomplished that, with all your passions and sort of your background, you brought it together in this way that, I mean, from the outside, it seems like, I guess I should just ask, is it sort of gratifying how you've been able to weave all these things? It seems like you get to do a little bit of everything you love. Yeah.
I mean, I'm the luckiest person in the world in that regard. Like I love that. It was not like an easy straight path. It was a journey full of a lot of like kind of, self-doubt and chaos, but eventually came into this situation right now, which is, I think, fantastic. I've really been enjoying the work that I've been doing. Yeah. But I mean, I think anyone can kind of find that. It's not always, it's not something that you see. It's when you look back on it, you're like, oh, okay, that makes a little bit of sense why I did that or why that happened that way. But when you're going through it, you don't know what the end result's going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's great that you can look back now and sort of see the culmination of all the different worlds you've been a part of and work that you've done. So last question, we've been asking all our guests this. What is your personal bill of materials? You can interpret the question however you want. We've said, what gets you out of bed in the morning, gets you through your week.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I love being outside. So any kind of work that I get to do outside really kind of fuels me, I was traveling a lot, and traveling is something that I absolutely love doing as well. So if I have that opportunity too, but during the pandemic too, I had a lot of time to kind of be at home with my daughter, who also now is at an age that she totally inspires me, and she's so curious and always asks questions about the stuff that I do. And it really makes me think a lot about how do I explain things in a way that a 5-year-old understands them, but still not talking to her like she's dumb. I want her to learn these sorts of things. And so spending time with her is a big part of the stuff that I do. Yeah. So
awesome. Yeah. And so lastly, just anything else you want to plug, any opportunities with Conservify or FieldKit you want to get out there or mention before we wrap it up? Yeah.
I mean, I would say definitely follow along on the social media for FieldKit and Conservify. We're actually looking to grow the team this next year, and so there's going to be some opportunities through that.
Nice.
Yeah, job opportunities.
I can personally recommend Shah and Jacob as awesome collaborators and people to work with. Yeah. So we'll definitely put the word out there.
Yeah, and we offer like special perks that other organizations don't. Like you'll get to go to the Amazon or to Africa or something as
pretty
part of
incredible,
this work, which is cool, and so I mean, definitely keep an eye out for that. And then there's a bunch of new sensors and things that we're going to be launching that I think people would be interested in, stuff that if you live in a more urban environment around air quality, that you might be interested to have in your backyard or something. So definitely keep posted in there.
Very exciting. And people should definitely check you all out on social media. I know you guys are active on Instagram and Twitter, and you have a great blog. So last but not least, can you let us know where we can find you all on social media?
Yeah. So, I have you can follow me on Twitter at Shah Selbe, and then my Instagram's at SSELBE. And then FieldKit.org on both those. And then you can also find us on GitHub for FieldKit, and Conservify is the same. It's just all Conservify for the three of those, Instagram, Twitter, and GitHub.
Thank you so much, Shah, for taking the time today. I know you're busy, you're in between trips, so super excited to keep following along all that you and Conservify and FieldKit teams are doing. Thanks so much, Shah.
Yeah, no, it was a pleasure. Thanks a lot.
We're back with another DesignLab debrief with my colleagues Giovanni and Bruce. And I think we're all excited to discuss someone close to the DesignLab Supplyframe Hackaday family, Shah Selbe, and Conservify and FieldKit. FieldKit was one of our past resident projects and Hackaday Prize winners, so we hold their work near and dear to our hearts.
Definitely. We've seen a lot of their projects. Some of the projects we saw them in their initial phases here at the lab, and now it's really, really interesting to see how they're already online, and they're even dealing with production challenges now.
Right. Yeah, we were there for the very early 3D printed stages, CNC'd foam,
laser cut, acrylic enclosures,
and now they've evolved to the next level, the next stage of challenges, as you mentioned.
And I'm a big fan of their mission, to give, how can I express this? To empower the population by giving them access to the data that is around them. And also all their equipment is made the most flexible and the most affordable possible. So it's a great way of democratizing data technology and making communities better, not just here in the US, but all around the world.
Totally. And you're getting some firsthand experience dealing with some of the challenges around sensors and urban environment kind of data collection with the project we're developing for our 4th prize DesignLab builds.
Yes, it's been, and I was telling this to Shah just a minute ago, how it's a rabbit hole that I'm just going down deeper and deeper, because it's so interesting how air quality can affect our life. But there are so many sensors and so many parameters and tables with information that if someone puts all that information together and shows it to people in a format that they can understand what is going on, they can make better decisions about how they want their air quality in their house or their work. So it's I love it. I've been learning a lot, and I think this is just the beginning.
Absolutely.
It's great, the aggregation of information into digestible, understandable bites.
One of the things we're doing, Bruce, is that we take the data from ASHRAE. Well, first of all, the data that sensors read, and we compare it to ASHRAE and EPA standards or levels. And then instead of saying, oh, we have X number of particles per million, we put it in a text format, and we drop something in the likes of, the air in your area is getting a bit more polluted.
And this is not the first sort of conservation technology project we've worked on since FieldKit was a resident. We also had the opportunity to work with Conservation X Labs in 2020 for our Dream Team initiative. One of our teams was working on a ghost gear challenge with them. One of their main goals is to eliminate ghost gear in our oceans. It's one of the largest pollutants and issues threatening kind of wildlife diversity in the oceans. And so we put out this challenge. We recruited our dream team of 3 engineers and designers around the world, which culminated in Team EDGA, which we worked with to develop an intelligent buoy system. And I know that was a really interesting challenge for us to jump into also as people that aren't fully dedicated to this all the time. But I think some of the things that Shah mentioned about building long-term relationships and working with others in the space who already have sort of established connections and relationships and understanding of the problems definitely was a huge part of it. So being able to work with their representative, Sam Kelly, to understand, the feedback of what was working and not working with the solution that our EDGA team developed was huge.
Yes, his feedback was super helpful. And a shout out to Aaron and Leo, who did so much amazing work with this unit.
Yeah, that device was really incredible. I mean, they based it off the concept of using a Nalgene bottle to get started.
Yes.
Yeah, they were thinking about all the same things that Shah mentioned. They incorporate when designing Conservify and FieldKit's technology. How can you make things out of readily available supplies that you can get anywhere in the world? So as Bruce mentioned, the Nalgene bottle and some of the other hardware and things, the goal was for it to be easily accessible anywhere, not that you needed a specialty provider or supplier to access these enclosures or whatever you were creating.
Yes, Erin worked a lot with mechanisms. She is a big enthusiast and robots, and she builds robots herself too. So she applied that knowledge. And then Leo, with all the electronic engineering knowledge, he worked his magic to design a system that could locate via GPS, at least with some parameter, with some range. You can't do it that specifically. Your buoy in the open sea, and it would show you where it was at any given point once it was released. So yeah, it was a very interesting project.
Erin was definitely one of the MVPs of that dream team, and it's great to see her now entering the Hackaday Prize this year. She had an awesome solution for the first challenge that I believe she's a finalist for. So it'll be exciting to see where that goes. And again, Shah is one of our previous residents, Hackaday Prize winners. Always great to welcome him back to a new project that we're working on. And I love, as we mentioned before, sort of once you're in the network, we don't let you out. And Bruce and Gio are actually excellent examples of this as well. Both Bruce and Gio started as residents at DesignLab and I think are still happy to be here, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
years later.
We're talking about the concept of open source, and really that, to me, it means sharing and putting it out there for other people to really kind of use. And you look at like Giovanni, Shah, myself, a lot of other the community members that frequently come back. That's what we love to do. And so that's why we're always hanging around. We don't really go away when we have such a great community. And even if you can't do it in person here to where we're at, it's the Hackaday.io community. It's super active. So when it comes down to it, for me, open source is really about sharing what you know.
Sharing is caring. And I have to confess that when I started here, I loved the work that I do at the DesignLab since day one. But the thing that I was not very enthusiastic about was the documentation, putting the documentation on Hackaday.io. I didn't know where to start. We had a few, you have the logs, you have the description and all that. And I struggled with how do I get started? But now I find myself in the situation where I hesitate for a moment how to begin with the documentation, and then I can't stop. It's so much fun to share not only the components that you have, but also the journey. Take photos. Oh, this print didn't go well. I might as well share.
Right. Share
happened.
The challenges, because all of that stuff is super relatable to everyone who's ever tried to make or build something, especially with hardware. So I do think that's a great thing to highlight, is how, failures and successes are equally celebrated, because you learn something with each mistake, and you're able to build off one another's mistakes and learn from each other's, instead of, wasting your own time doing that when it happens. So
and now I find myself in a position where I either receive a file or generate a file, and the first thing I think is, I'm going to upload it to the project page.
Totally. Right. On that note, I'm going to say get on Hackaday.io. We are wrapping up the third challenge, Hack It Back, getting ready for climate resilient communities. So definitely check out Hackaday.io, Hackaday Prize. We're getting towards the end here. There's only going to be 2 challenges left to enter. There's $500 on the line for each of our finalists, and then 50,000 grand prize dollars on the line. Yes, 50,000 is the grand prize this year, thanks to our sponsors Supplyframe and DigiKey. So definitely check that out. Don't be afraid to document your work. It's awesome for everyone else in the community, and you never know what you're going to get out of it.
Thanks so much for listening to The Bomb. Next week, we'll wrap up our open source series with Editor-in-Chief of Hackaday, Elliot Williams. I hope you'll join us. If you like The Bomb, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Supplyframe and Hackaday on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and DesignLab at Supplyframe DesignLab on Instagram and Twitter. The Bomb is a Supplyframe podcast written, produced, and edited by Frank Driscoll and co-edited by Daniel Ferreira. Executive producers are Ryan Tillotson and Tyler Nielsen. Theme music is by Anna Hogbin, with show art by Thomas Schneider. Special thanks to Giovanni Salinas, Bruce Dominguez, Thomas Woodward, Jin Kumar, Jordan Clark, Matt Gunn, the entire Supplyframe team, and you, our wonderful listeners. I'm your host, Majenta Strongheart.